We recently released our review of the impressive Forte Formula wheel from Asetek, and it's safe to say it was a bit of a hit. Now, I'm going to take a look at the Asetek Forte wheelbase to see if we like it just as much as we like the steering wheel. The Forte wheelbase I'm looking at today is just one of 3 wheelbases that Asetek currently offer. The Forte sits slap bang in the middle of this lineup and is capable of producing 18 Nm of peak torque. The other 2 wheelbases include the La Prima, which is Asetek's more budget-orientated wheelbase, which is capable of 12 Nm of peak torque. Then there's the Invicta, which is the top of the range wheelbase, which can create a whopping 27 Nm of torque. Personally, I believe that the Forte is the wheelbase that you should be looking at, and I'll tell you why later in this review. But before I jump into the review, I wanted to disclose that this wheelbase was sent to me for review by the guys at Asetek. And with all reviews, this does not impact the outcome of this review in any way whatsoever. So I did look into who exactly Asetek are and why you should be interested in them as one of the more impressive sim racing companies in our Forte steering wheel review. So if you're after an overview, I'd recommend going ahead and checking out our Forte steering wheel review to see who Asetek are. But for now, I'm going to jump right into the price of this Forte wheelbase. As I mentioned, this wheelbase is the middle of the ground when it comes to performance in the Asetek wheelbase range, and it occupies that middle ground in terms of price as well. While the La Prima wheelbase can only be purchased in a bundle and the Invicta costs north of €1,300 or $1,500, the Forte costs just a little over $1,000 and just under €900. To put that price into perspective, the Simucube 2 Sport, which is relatively comparable on performance, is priced higher than the Forte at €1,230 or $1,200, and the Fanatec DD1 costs €1,200 or dollars. That comparison makes the Asetek Forte look pretty reasonably priced, undercutting 2 of its direct competitors. However, there are a few areas of this wheelbase design that I don't think are quite as nice as the 2 other wheelbases I just mentioned. The design really is an area where some people will like it and others not so much, and I'm really in the kind of middle of both of those categories. There are parts of the design that I really like, such as the inclusion of the LED light strips. These bring a real sense of cool to the wheel, and they tie together nicely with the Forte steering wheel and the pedals, both of which feature similar LED lighting. You can change the LED light strip to any colour to match the lighting across the rest of your sim rig, or if you're not a fan, you can just turn it off completely. The rest of the design of the Forte wheelbase is relatively standard for larger direct drive wheels. It's a rectangular shaped black box with grooves carved into each side, not too dissimilar from the grooves found in more recent small form factor wheelbases. These grooves are a small piece of design flair, as is the gloss black logo plate across the front of the base. There is a fine but noticeable line that runs through the middle of this wheelbase, almost slicing it in half. I'm not quite sure why all pieces weren't constructed as a single piece, instead being split in half all the way round, but it does look like a weird crease down what should be a pretty long, elegant piece of metal. The majority of this wheelbase is constructed from aluminium, however, the part of the design which I'm not as keen on is the choice of plastic over metal at both ends of the chassis. And the front part of this wheelbase is the part which you'll be able to see when sitting behind the wheel. I'm unsure whether this is for cost saving or because it's easier to mould the strange shape at either end of the wheelbase in plastic, but whichever it is, it does detract somewhat from the overall premium feel that this wheelbase should really have. Other than that, this is a relatively sleek looking wheelbase, and to be fair, you're not going to be spending too much time staring at it while on track. Overall, the build quality from the exterior seems pretty decent. The casing is nice and sturdy, thanks to the aluminium design, although it'd be nice to see some of the small niggles addressed on future products. The line that runs all the way around the wheelbase in particular, and the plastic across the front and back do detract a little. Now, I'm not going to take the wheelbase apart and dive into the internal build quality, as that's really not what I do. But if that sort of thing tickles your pickle, I'd recommend checking out Will at Boosted Media, as he does some fantastic deep dives into the more technical side of sim racing products. Around the back are a good number of connection ports. You've got your usual power ports, but then you have a huge number of USB-C ports. These allow you to connect your pedals and I'm presuming in the future they'll be used for additional peripherals such as handbrakes or shifters. Underneath all of the USB-C ports are 2 additional connections which are designed for the power button and the kill switch. Both of these additional buttons are included as separate items with the Forte wheelbase. These additional buttons are designed to be mounted directly to your sim rig and allow for easy access to both turning the wheel on and off and pressing the emergency stop if something goes a bit sideways. Both of these buttons come in their own individual housing with mounting points at the bottom, but they can also be removed from the casing and mounted to your sim rig however you like. And talking of mounting, there are a range of options when it comes to mounting this Asetek wheelbase to your rig. And before I go any further, I'd highly recommend you using a sim rig and not mounting this beast to a table or desk. I haven't tried it, but it's certainly strong enough that I'd imagine it'd probably break something. You can choose between a variety of mounting styles, from bottom mounting, which is fairly standard, to side or front mounting if you have an 80/20 sim rig. The wheelbase itself features a couple of grooves on the bottom which include T-nuts. These aren't too dissimilar from the way that some Fanatec wheels mount to a rig. Simply slide the T-nuts into position, which aligns with your sim rig mounting platform, and then just screw it in from the bottom. This is possibly the way many will choose to mount the Forte wheelbase, and it's probably the easiest. But it is important to note that the 2 T-nut channels are spaced 87mm apart, which may not directly align with your sim rig. If that's the case, you could either drill some custom holes into your wheel plates, or look at Asetek's other mounting options. You do have other bottom mounting options which include a tilting bottom mount and a static bottom mount. You'll see I've gone for the static mount here as it gives an area where I could mount the 2 switches as well. This option works well for me. I simply attached the mount itself to the wheelbase using the pre-drilled countersunk holes. Then I flipped it upside down and mounted it from the underneath onto my wheel plate on my sim rig. If you do have an aluminium profile 80/20 rig, you could opt for this approach, or either the side mount or the front mount. All 3 of these would work well and are really down to personal preference of how your sim rig is set up. I did talk about the quick release in our Forte steering wheel review, but I do want to touch on it again here. The design philosophy behind the Asetek quick release comes straight from the SQR, or the SimuCube quick release. Asetek took the general design concept from the SimuCube QR with the 2 interlocking parts, and then they tweaked it slightly to introduce a locking mechanism which is triggered by releasing a paddle on the steering wheel. This works fantastically well and results in a quick release that has 0 play and is super easy to use. You can remove your steering wheel completely one-handed with very little pressure needing to be applied to the quick release paddle. And while there is only one Asetek steering wheel currently that is compatible with this quick release, there is a quick release adapter in the works, and this will allow you to use your favourite steering wheels from other brands with this wheelbase. And that adaptability of using a variety of different steering wheels with this wheel carries over into the unique upgrade path that Asetek has laid out. You may wonder why all 3 Asetek wheelbases from the La Prima up to the Invicta look practically the same, and that is to allow for upgrading of your wheelbase over time. That's right, if you want to buy a La Prima wheelbase, you can upgrade it to one of the more powerful wheelbases at a time that suits you. Asetek are planning on introducing a range of upgrade kits that allow you to upgrade the power and performance of your wheelbase without having to buy a completely new product. This is a really neat idea and one that will hopefully make upgrading simpler and cheaper, as well as reducing wastage from older wheelbases that need to be sold before buying a new one. Right, so with design and feature set of this Forte wheelbase well and truly discussed, it's time to now move on to what is possibly the most important part of any sim racing wheelbase, the performance. As I mentioned earlier, this Forte wheelbase is capable of peak forces up to 18 Nm of torque, and quite frankly that is more than enough for 99% of sim racers, me included. I said at the start of this review that I reckon the Forte wheelbase is the best one to choose out of all 3 Asetek bases, and that is partially because it has the perfect level of peak performance. While running this wheelbase at its maximum 18 Nm output, I was floored at just how powerful the force feedback felt. After a 20-minute session in an Assetto Corsa Compatibility, I could barely feel my hands due to the grip strength required at this peak level. I can't imagine how many people would be running this wheelbase at 18 Nm for prolonged periods of time, or how many Inhumans could keep up with the extra performance from the Invicta wheelbase. The strength of force feedback is incredible, and even at around 12 to 13 Nm of peak torque, which is roughly where I settled on for my sweet spot, it felt incredibly powerful. With 18 Nm of performance on offer, there is plenty of headroom for sim racers to tune this wheel's performance up or down, or from car to car or sim to sim. And the power is just one piece of that puzzle. The detail of this force feedback is incredible. Little details in the track surface to the lightness of the understeer and sense of weight balance really felt nice. A lot of that detail has to do with the encoder resolution, which has 4 million steps in a single rotation. As I said earlier, I'm not the person to come to talk too much tech, but essentially the higher that number, the more detailed your force feedback can be. And 4 million is a pretty large number. One area of force feedback that really stands out is the responsiveness. The speed at which the force feedback can change when hitting curbs, bumps, or even a quick direction change is really impressive. As you ride over a dip in the road or put a wheel on a curb or into the grass, the steering wheel reacts so quickly in your hands. You'll go from having a relatively tame steering wheel that is portraying fine details in the road surface to an absolute monster that is pulling hard to one side as your car reacts to the changing surface. The range of performance here is incredible. This responsiveness pairs with the smoothness during each transition. Every motion from the force feedback, each direction change and input you apply feels so smooth. You certainly won't find any feeling of mechanisms or artificial dead zones while racing with the Forte wheelbase, like you can with some racing wheels. Less premium wheelbases in particular often have a sense of notchiness to them, and even some more premium wheelbases can feel a little artificial in areas. There is absolutely none of that here. Turning the steering wheel is silky smooth and feels just like it should on a real world car. There really isn't any part of the force feedback performance that I could find much fault with. If I was really trying to find fault, the detail in the force feedback when the car is heavily loaded did feel a little underutilized. Mid-corner, while the weight of the car is really forcing you to lean into the steering, the track surface detail wasn't quite as prominent, but that could just require a small setting tweak within RaceHub to fix this. Overall, I was blown away by the speed, the responsiveness, and the overall detail of the force feedback on offer here. Now, it's certainly worth talking about the RaceHub software a little bit, as this is where you'll be spending all of your time if you want to tune your force feedback from game to game or scenario to scenario. It's worth noting that RaceHub is completely free to download and should certainly be installed so you can at least update your wheel's firmware before you use it. But jumping into RaceHub, you have a few different areas of your wheelbase that you can customize. Of course, you can change the RGB LED color on the outside of your wheelbase as I mentioned before, but the real magic is in the force feedback settings. There are a range of settings you can change in the settings, but RaceHub portrays these in a really simple to understand way, and that's definitely a good thing. The technology behind force feedback is incredibly complex, but simpletons like me don't want to have to read and understand Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time just to be able to optimize my force feedback settings. Some sim racing brands provide hundreds of different settings for you to change, half of which I don't understand. The way Asetek gives you control is just right. There are enough settings to allow us to optimize our force feedback using common and relatively easy to understand settings such as damping, friction and inertia, yet these settings aren't overwhelming. RaceHub lets you save your settings as presets which you can load up quickly when jumping into different sim titles, and this is about everything you could ask for from a piece of sim racing software. Now, I do want to touch on compatibility a little bit, but to be honest it's going to be incredibly short. As of this review, the Asetek Forte wheelbase is compatible with just one single steering wheel, the Forte Formula wheel. However, I'm sure it won't be long before Asetek releases some more steering wheels, otherwise there would be very little need for that fancy quick release. As I mentioned earlier, there is a quick release adapter in the works which will allow you to use this wheelbase with third-party steering wheels. And it's also compatible with all of Asetek's range of pedals such as the Forte or Invicta. You aren't just locked into using the same product range of pedals. You do have the freedom to use lesser or higher performing pedals if you wish. Whichever pedal set you choose, you can connect them directly to your wheelbase to help a little bit with cable management, which is always a good tip from me. And the wheelbase itself is only compatible with PC. There's no Xbox or PS5 compatibility here, which isn't much of a surprise. So with everything said and done, would I recommend the Asetek Forte wheelbase? Well, hell yeah I would. The sheer force feedback performance on offer from this direct drive racing wheel is incredible, and I have to say it outperforms the other direct drive wheelbases I've tested up until now. Aside from the force feedback, there is a lot to love about this wheelbase. It's cheaper than its direct rivals, has one of the very best quick release designs of any sim racing wheel. It'll have an upgrade kit available to unlock additional performance at some point in the near future, and it has bright RGB LED lights plastered all over it. Okay, that last thing is a bit of a joke, and you really shouldn't be buying this wheel based on the fact that it has RGB lighting. But it does add a little bit of flair to the overall design, which I think is possibly the weakest part of this whole offering. Asetek really is a sim racing brand to keep an eye on over the coming years, and buying into the ecosystem now, at this price point, should be a serious consideration if you're looking for one of the very best, high-performing direct drive racing wheels.